Good evening. I'm Laurie Servas, and for my doctoral research, when I was studying for my PhD, I did most of it on the Guignolee and on the French heritage of the Midwest region. I finished my dissertation and my doctoral research at the University of Louisiana Lafayette, and now I teach full-time at Sacred Heart in Grand Coteau in Louisiana. I teach French and Spanish there. And I continue to work and study the Guignolee and the heritage and the history of where it came from, especially since it's an oral tradition that has been transmitted from generation to generation. And there's not a lot really documented throughout the generations except in newspaper clippings and from stories from families and people who have participated in it. And so today I'm going to talk about some of the history that I have been able to uncover throughout my research and understand its connection to France and to some other cultures that were here or elsewhere. And so this is a banner that's in the museum that when I first saw this image, it was through a pin, an image of a pin that Art Papin gave me that his son took that he had received. And shows the dates of the Guignolee, and you can see the spelling of La Guignolee, and it's in 1735 to 1915, and at the time that this banner existed as well as the pin, it was a social club and people paid dues for it. And the spelling you see is different than what you see today, and there are different spellings for the different regions. And in St. Genevieve, prior to the 1935 bicentennial, it was spelled by Guignolee that I saw throughout the writings and what I read. In Prairie de Rocher, they continue to use the spelling of La Guignolee. And in Cahokia, the writings from what I uncovered in articles and pamphlets and booklets I received from different people who are from Cahokia, they spelled it La Guignolee, as well as newspaper articles. Kaskaskia also spells it the same way as Cahokia, La Guignolee. In Old Mines, they have a different variation of La Guignolee. And then for the bicentennial of St. Genevieve, the spelling was changed from La Guignolee to La Guignolee to reflect a clownish band of revelers and carousers in a New York City theater. And that is a quote from the bicentennial pamphlet. Now there are other versions and French variants throughout Canada and France. So most of the region that we're going to look at where they come from are these two regions, Normandy and Brittany, and then in Quebec here. Those are where the Guignolee primarily existed or still exists in some form. So in France, in Normandy and Brittany, you have La Guignolee, La Guignonée, La Guignona, Aguilaneux, Aguilando, Guigneux, and Aguilaneuf. In Canada, you have La Guignolee or La Guignolee. So you have like all of these different spellings, but these are not the only ones that you find. In other European regions, you have Hogmanay or Hogmanay, Uguranoni, Oguna, Nikinan, Oiguinano, Guianay, and Aguinando. So in the 12th century, Daniel Fabre traced the roots of Carnival and this festival of the inverted form. So basically, Daniel Fabre, these are the type of ideas that there was night, they blacken the face with soot, sack or loose inverted clothing, and basically this is what he describes. So at night in the snow a group forms. It is enough to blacken the face with soot or to hide it under a loosely woven fabric, to squeeze oneself into a sack, or simply to invert the clothing with the seams visible. Thus metamorphosed, the young go all over the village in long runs on nights of the full moon. The group approaches a farm in a village or in the outskirts. The young men advance with muffled steps to the rays of light, and there, all of a sudden, bursts out the ooh, ooh. So that's a description from the 12th century in France. So in the Middle Ages, they had obviously this kind of description. Well, I came across an interview that, a transcript of an interview that I had been given by Margaret Brown, who had been doing research with the French communities in Prairie de Rocher, as well as an article that that was an interview with Alfred Papin, who described some similar kind of descriptions. So Mr. Louveau in the 20th century described what it was like for him. Oh, they were dressed up in false faces and old dresses. Some of them had dresses on, and they stuffed the dresses full of rags and made themselves look all out of shape. Most of them had black socks in their face, burnt cork they'd put on their face. They'd wear hats, they had costumes, but it was just whatever you had in the house that they'd put on. They kind of made a racket on the porch, and then you'd open the door and they'd come in. And Alfred Papin's description is very similar to the same 12th century description. A lot of them wore dresses or torn patch pants. They dressed like hobos. We used corn shucks and cedar twigs, anything to camouflage ourselves. But everybody smoked, and first thing you know, you'd be on fire and somebody would be trying to put you out. And so this image right here of Percy Clare in Prairie de Rocher is similar to that description. I've seen another costume like that in Dances for Chicken. It's a Mardi Gras. It talks about the Mardi Gras in Louisiana, and they were sewing a costume similar to that using corn husks and Spanish moss. And so you can see the connection between the 12th century description and the 20th century description is very close. It's almost like you could just squish full time and space and they were the same. And so here is a picture from the St. Genevieve Herald at 1912, and I tried to pick out two representations that I thought would best describe that 12th century description. So you have a black painted face there, and then you have like what would look like the sack kind of inverted clothing. You see other kinds of characters, and also of the royalty, and then the clowns. Okay, and then Fanche Postic, he's an academic in Brittany, France, and he does a lot of work with the traditions in his area. I read an article on what he wrote about the Guignolee and its heritage there. And for him, in the 16th century, he found a description where he said the New Year celebration in the countryside of Brittany, the participants waited until the fat days to go on tour. A poor soul, surrounded by 10 or so people, went from house to house begging for the lard he needed to nourish his family. Each group member had a particular task. One was responsible for a long stick to rap violently on the visitor's door, which was also used to hang the morsels of lard received during visits. Another was in charge of the sack for the remaining parts of the butchered pig they received. To gain entrance, they often had to sing for a long time to prove their determination and cleverness. And so, again, you see this same idea that where there's disguise, traveling from home to home and singing, and there's this connection between the 16th century and as well as the Midwest version. And then Ernest Gagnon, who's in Canada, he was studying the chansons populaires de Canada, the popular folk songs of Canada, and his description is similar. The Guignolee, having arrived at a house in front of the door, beat the time out with long sticks while singing. Never did they enter a home before the master and the mistress of the home, or their representatives, would come in grand ceremony to open the door for them and invite them to enter. They would have something, would receive gifts in a bag, they would then empty into a car that followed the group. Then they would wander toward another house, escorted by all the children and dogs of the neighborhood, such that the joy was so great and universal. So for all of these versions, the joy, the community celebration was important, and going and visiting from house to house. And I recently went back and looked at Firmin Roger's book on St. Genevieve, and In 1890, this is a shortened version of his description. It took the most important part. On New Year's Eve, the French inhabitants assembled together, decorated with fantastic costumes, to visit each family, to sing and dance the Guignolee. It was an occasion of much mirth and good feeling. So this is Roger's version, and I highlighted parts of the song that began to differ as I saw versions, and this is what I'm currently kind of working on, is gathering different versions of the Guignolee song to see where all of them differ and what has been either added or changed or taken away. And so you have Une Chine n'est pas bien longue, and nous le ferons chauffer les pieds, nous saluons la compagnie, and then also Dansons l'agonie. This is his version of it in 1890. Okay, and this is in the bicentennial pamphlets. So the green parts are what has been added since 1890 to 1935. So somewhere in between that time of that publishing of that book, the parts in green have been added. But I recently found a website where there's I was looking for something for one of my classes for my students, and it was on about Christmas time and exchanging of gifts, and they had verses that were similar to the ones that were talking about the birds and the dove and the nightingale. But I haven't pursued that yet too much. I need to go back and look at that some more. And then in the transcription that I did of the current song, there were two lines that were deleted from the previous version. So this is what I transcribed, and so what's in yellow is what has changed somewhat based off of what I heard now from this version in 1935. And then Ward Dorrance, he did much of his research on the St. Genevieve district and talked about the St. Genevieve celebrations. And he said there were a number of special festivities in St. Genevieve at which these talents of music and dancing might be exercised. The Guignolee or Guéanais at Christmas, the Bal des Rois on Twelfth Night, the Charivaries, etc. But then he said, there's been enough written about this, I don't have to talk about it anymore. So I know I've read something else by Ward Dorrance where he does talk a little bit more in depth. So this might be a later observation than this. And Ida Schaff, she did a lot of work on St. Genevieve, just St. Genevieve. I think she was from St. Mary, very close. But she did a lot of work on St. Genevieve, a lot of genealogy. Most of her research is in the Missouri History Museum archives, which is over on Skinker and Lindell. I spent many hours reading her work. And this is an article that I had from her. But on the eve of the new year, the entire night was one of revelry, much eating and drinking and making merry. And in a window of each home, a candle burned brightly, the signal that La Guignolee was expected and would be welcomed. This was a band of men dressed in fantastic costumes, wearing masks, who came silently from no one knew where, sang and danced, ate and drank, and went just as mysteriously. A burst of a song announced the arrival, a pause, a knock at the door, which is thrown open by the master of the house. In St. Genevieve, the presents were such things as coffee, cakes, wine, meats, chicken, etc., to be used for the banquet of the king and queen ball of the night of Epiphany. And then Belden, who was working with ballads and songs from Missouri, he cited Ida Schaff to further kind of define that costume is that of an Indian chief. It's quite likely that the custom and costumes are a mixture of French and Indian. And during my research, I also found in the dictionary of Missouri French where they were talking about, you know, in the French custom, they painted their faces black at night because that most of the people in this kind of celebration came from an agricultural community. And so all they had available to them was the black soots or the burnt cork. So they didn't have a wide variety of resources. But in Native American culture, they painted themselves black in order to it was the hunter who was the most skilled, who had the most, I guess, kills for meat. He was the best hunter of the group. So he was painted black as part of the ceremony. And then, as well as in the Caribbean, there's in order to celebrate during Carnival, to celebrate the slaves that had inspired freedom and had led the revolution toward freedom, they also paint themselves black with molasses paint. So the painting oneself black is a ceremonial rite in a sense, and it's part of the whole disguise. And Lucille Basler in 1980, she wrote, and this was in my Ida Schaaf paper, so I'm assuming I got it from the Missouri History Museum, and I think it was just kind of tucked away in her folder. I'm not sure or it was tucked away in the same box as hers. So this is Lucille Basler's description. Their next big celebration was on New Year's Eve, when the young men of the village went from house to house, dressed in outlandish costumes, singing and dancing the La Guignolee and begging to dance with the oldest daughter and also for a piece of sausage a yard long. At each stop, the Yates drank of the host wine and continued on. How they felt on the New Year's morning is doubtful, but it does not seem to have affected the custom any, as it still continues each New Year's, with the dancing and singing going to more public places, as there are too many houses to make a visit to each. And then, again, going back to the banner, this is a picture in Bill and Patty Nager's book, St. Genevieve, A Leisurely Stroll Through History. You see the group photographed with the banner as a social club, and then this is the pin that Art gave me the photo of the pin taken by his son. And so you can see that the dates here are 1735 to 1915. This is for the year 1912 to 1913. And I could not read the date in the photo, so I'm not sure if the date is exactly the same as the pin or if it's right around that time. These are other photos. This one's in the museum. This one's in the St. Genevieve Herald. So this one is in 1963. This, I think, is around the same time. Okay, and these are my photos from 2006 to 2010 of the Guignolee, and you can see some of the costumes, how some of them, there's some that are masked. You see there's still a king, there's different types of characters, and they're representative from what Pete and Mike and Art have told me, as well as some other people told me, that these are representatives of the community as they would have been in the colonial period. And Art, for him, this is what is talking about the Guignolee being a tradition and being passed down over the years and through the family, and how it survived through the oral tradition. For Art, it was like my great-grandfather Francois was very interested in La Guignolee, which had been performed here every year for the last 270 years, and in Canada before that, in Normandy, France before that. The La Guignolee and the King's Ball was one of the biggest social events of the year in his day, and he played a big part in it because he was the leader of the Guignolee. And in the second paragraph, there's a description that he gave me of them back in the day when they would do it. You can see the white lights, 2 white horses, and they'd pick him up at his house and take him down to the Armory Hall. Then they would travel from place to place as well, and then they would go back and have a banquet at the end of the night. And then for Pete, this is his memory. Do you want to read I didn't even ask Art if you wanted to read. Did you want to read, Pete? It's all right. Okay. Okay, for Pete, to me, it's really a tradition that I've seen come from my dad, and his dad and all the brothers went with the Guignolee, that it was a must. It was a celebration that was passed down. Now his son David and my son Mike are really very instrumental in keeping it alive. I remember my dad went down to the school and was talking to one of the teachers, and the teachers asked him if he could teach the 8th grade class de la Guignolee. They didn't have a place to meet, so they met at the funeral home. In the basement of the funeral home, the wine cellar, close to the wine cellar. Mrs. Dempsey taught one of the girls to play the violin, and she played with them, and they started to sing it. So the whole class was taught the La Guignolee and hoping that it won't retire for a few years. And then Mike, when I asked what the Guignolee was about for him and why he decided to do it, this is what he told me. As a child, I just remember me and my cousins listening to the record. I guess about the time it came with Grandpa singing on it, my grandpa sang the solo on it. So it was distinctive. And growing up, my mom would take us to the local gym or wherever the Guignolee was playing for the local public. It was fun as a kid to see all the outfits, and there were clowns in it, and it looked like people were having a good time. Everyone wore a mask, and it was just fun to see if you could recognize everybody as a kid. That's a tradition thing that I hadn't really thought about doing. So I just started listening to the album and learning it, and my grandma was in the nursing home right before she passed. I wanted to sing the solo part, and so I said, well, I'll make the extra effort to learn it and keep it going. And so, in addition to the traveling, there always was a mention of the banquet, as you see in many of the descriptions. So in the St. Genevieve Museum, there's also the menus or the banquet booklets where they had from 1912 to 1917. That's all there is, but I think from what I understand, from what I've read, and I don't remember the source off the top of my head, that around 1917, I think that's when a lot of men went off to World War I. And so there wasn't so much a social club anymore as it was the women and other people who were trying to keep it going. But now, instead of doing the banquet, you know, you have the King's Ball that happens in February. And that's sort of connected. That's what I found when I started studying most of this, was that the King's Ball was like the second half of the Guignolee, instead of having the banquet on the same night. Now, the Guignolee does stop for a bouillon in the middle of their celebration, around 9 o'clock or so, and they take a break and eat a warm bouillon, chicken bouillon. And then they continue on for the rest of the night. But at each place, when I would go with them, there was still food. So you're still eating all night long. So, and getting, they had free drinks and free food all night long. It's not a bad way to celebrate the New Year's. So when I was looking at the holiday season and the way it plays out, and I kind of put this together based off of my understanding of the different celebrations, as well as how they are linked to some of the holidays that we have and what's left over from the French culture that is still in place and still staying here, that didn't get assimilated into American culture, and how it's similar now what I see in the different, like the carnival season left over, and so you have a liturgical calendar and what is called the carnival calendar. So in the liturgical calendar, you have holidays such as All Saints' Day, Christmas Eve, Christmas, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, Epiphany, Ash Wednesday, Lent, and Easter. And then in the carnival calendar, now I did put some places in here. You have Halloween, which is just anywhere in the U.S. Most people celebrate Halloween. Christmas Festival and Le Réveillon is in Missouri. I found, and in parts of, and in like mostly the Midwest, where it was the old Illinois country, everybody celebrates pretty much the Réveillon if they're Catholic. La Guignolee is in Missouri and Illinois. The King's Ball is here. La Chandeleur is celebrated here as well as in Canada. They actually, I believe in Prince Edward Islands, they do La Chandeleur. It's a similar celebration where they go from place to place, they dress up, and they sing. And I meant to bring that book with me, and I left that one at home. But they do a similar song, and they travel around. And then here we also celebrate it with the Candlemas. And then Mardi Gras, obviously in Louisiana. And then there is places in Missouri that do Mardi Gras, you know, that celebrate parts of Mardi Gras. And then Mi-Carême. In Canada, they do celebrate, in Nova Scotia, they do have a celebration called La Mi-Carême, where they do travel around from, and that's mid-Lent, they do travel around from place to place in the middle of Lent as a celebratory break from the cold and from the fasting. And so this is kind of like what I put together just based off of my understanding of all the different celebrations that I'd heard about or read about. And so you have the different, like most of those traveling celebrations that go from place to place in the community happen during the wintertime when there is nothing going on in the agricultural world, or there can't be anything going on in the agricultural world. You can't grow anything necessarily. But it also coincides with a lot of holy days of obligation, and like All Saints' Day, the Epiphany, Candlemas, Holy Week, Christmas. And so those are the things. And then some of them I added, French Festival and Jour de Fête, I added as kind of like an extension of that calendar that helps keep the French culture and the French identity alive throughout the year, to carry it over to the celebrations that really bring out the French identity and kind of bring that community together in that respect. And that's pretty much where I have. And Pete brought the original with your dad singing on it. If do you want to hear that version?
Shortly after nightfall on the eve of each new year, a group of people in grotesque masks and beggar-like costumes gather at some appointed place in the village of St. Genevieve, Missouri. They meet to take part in La Guignolee, which has been celebrated here for more than 200 years. The groups vary in size from year to year, but usually are comprised of about 20 singers and 2 or 3 fiddlers. Some of the older men in the group have been singing La Guignolee for more than half a century. When the time comes, usually about 6:30 in the evening, the celebrants begin their tour. Those at whose homes the singers stop deem it a mark of extreme courtesy. When the group arrives at a house, they always try to do it quietly. Pause at the doorway, and upon a signal from their leader, the musicians in the group strike up the fiddles. Then the song leader begins the first couplet of the song as a solo, with the entire group echoing the response. After the first stanza of the song is complete, the singers pause. The householder, who always shows delight and pretends surprise, opens the door, and the group enters to complete the song. All this is done in French patios, a form of that language common during the earlier days of the settlement of St. Genevieve. Upon completion of the song, the householder entertains the participants with food and drink, and after exchanging pleasantries and wishes for the happiest new year, the singers move on to their next house of call. A visitor hearing the Guignolee for the first time may not understand the words of the song, but he easily observes the rapt attention of the listeners, even though some of them may have heard the Guignolee throughout their lifetime. Those who observe the Guignolee depart feeling that they have witnessed a most unique event. Yes, this event was once widely practiced in French villages of Canada and the Mississippi Valley, but now is perpetuated in only a few historical shrines such as St. Genevieve, Missouri, the mother of the West that was settled more than 220 years ago, and over which flags of 3 nations have flown: the French, the Spanish, and the United States of America. The most predominant influence being wielded by the French, then the nationality of the area. La Guignolee is one of the few surviving songs of the early French in the New World, and its origin is not fully known. Some say it was known to exist 500 years ago in France, and it may be even older than that. We hope that this recording by some of the finest French singers in the current La Guignolee group from St. Genevieve will be a cherished part of your collection and may help to perpetuate one of the oldest and most popular customs of a bygone day, La Guignolee in St. Genevieve, Missouri. péché de dormir. Enfant sur le maître et là, le trace aux états du logis. Nous suppléons accompagnés de vos voix, nous bien excusés. Si nous avons fait quelques folies, c'était pour nous qui ennuyés. Et notre foi, si nous prenons gardons, nous avons honneur de revenir. Enfant sur la maître et la maîtresse aux états, la monde du logis. Enfant sur la maître et la maîtresse aux états, la monde du logis.
Let's go back to the song. So the opening is "Good evening, master and mistress and everyone of the home. For the last day of the year, the Guignolee, you owe us the Guignolee, or the Guignolee." Now, everybody wants to know what does that word mean, and it's spelled so many different ways. Well, Fanch Postic, who I had talked about earlier, and his research, he did an etymological research of the word Guignolee. Where does it come from? And what he wanted to, a lot of people say that it comes from Guy, meaning mistletoe, and it's from the Druids who used to bless it at the start of the new year. But what he found was it was kind of even more than just that. That if you trace it back, like Druids were kind of Celtic, so he's like, well, how would they know what a French word is if they were saying Guy? What would it actually, he's like, what would it be in maybe the Celtic language? So he went back and he researched dictionaries, and what he found was that the word Guignolee or Guignolee is from a word Eginane, which is spelled A-E-G-I-N-A-N-E, no accent marks, anything like that. It's a Celtic word in an old version of I guess, Gallic and Cornish. Or I think Cornish is, I know it's Gallic, and it means wheat germ. And it kind of fits with the rest of the song. Thinking of it as this is sung in an agricultural community, and they're singing during the winter, and they're asking for, it's a new year, and they want to renew the earth, they want to renew the community, they're asking for seeds to replant. So that makes, to me it made more sense in an agricultural community to ask your community members to share seeds to go replant the crops for the new year. So the next stanza is talking about, if you have nothing to give us, just let us know. We aren't asking for a lot, just a backbone of pork, an échiné. An échiné, backbone of pork, is not a whole lot. It's only 10 feet long. We're going to make a fricassé of 90 feet long, if you have nothing to give us. So the échiné du porc, or the backbone, pork backbone, that was for the pig butcherings, and that's when a lot of these celebrations came around, was also when they did a lot of butcherings for the winter to share the meat. And in Louisiana, you have the boucherie, which they did up here as well, and they still do in Louisiana. I'm not sure. I know there's some people that may still do it just to do it, but I haven't heard too many people. I don't live up here, so I come up here very often to know that, but in Louisiana they still do a boucherie. But that's sharing meat for the winter with your neighbors and the community. And so then they repeat the next stanza saying, if you have nothing to give us, then we only ask for the eldest daughter. We're only asking for, seeds and, pork, and now we want your eldest daughter. And what they found was, wanted more, also what I read too, and what I've come to understand is that, in the winter, the king's ball were given by the younger generations, and they always, included a king and a queen, and and they dance together. And then in June, marriages were announced, or you had weddings, and proposals were announced in the spring, and then weddings were in the summer. And so the dancing with the eldest daughter at this point is now, is kind of connecting the younger generations together, the community, to renew the community in that way. And so you have the seeds, then you have the pork, now you have the community members. And then they say that we're going to show her a good time, on lui en faire bon cher. We're going to treat her right, and then, they repeat that twice. And then the part in the green, when one's in the middle of the woods in the shade, I hear the dove sing, the dove and the nightingale sing. The rossignol, that's where my translation, I don't remember. The ambassador of the lovers, go tell my mistress that she always has a joyous heart, no sadness. The girls that don't have any loves, how do they live? And it's love that awakens her, that keeps her from sleeping. It's love that awakens her, keeps her from sleeping. And then the epilogue is an apology for the craziness that they stir up. We beg the company to please excuse us if we have created some sort of craziness. It was so that we wouldn't be bored. Good evening, master and mistress, and everyone of the house. For the last day of the year, you owe us the Guignolee. So, in that sense, to me, this song represents the community trying to renew itself through the sharing of the agricultural crops, of the livestock, and of creating bonds between the younger generations in order to keep the community going and to keep the renewal. And it's on New Year's Eve. And to me, that was really important to kind of take that etymology from the Celtic of meaning wheat germ rather than the mistletoe translation, in order to show that there is this sense of renewal, and it was important for the community. It was how the community survived. And I think that is how the Guignolee has been able to survive for so many years.
But I want to tell you my rendition of the Guignolee before I go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think you ought to give the benefits they can for keeping this tradition alive all these years.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, well, my cousin Art here is probably more responsible for the Guignolee than what I am, really. But my dad and his dad all kept the Guignolee going. I remember one time a reporter asked my dad about the Guignolee, and says, how did you French people ever come to have the Guignolee, and why was St. Genevieve ever established where it was? And he said, well, when the Pilgrims first got here, said there was a sign, one says Cape Girardeau this way and St. Louis that way. Those who could read went both ways, and the Frenchmen stayed here and settled St. Genevieve. So anyhow, that was his report. But the Guignolee today is a celebration to bring the new year in, and everybody having a good time, and a lot of drinking too. So thank you so much. And thank you, honey.
Oh, you're welcome.
Give you a hug. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you for talking to me.
So where did the term running the Guignolee come from, the running part of it?
I'm not sure. I've never really heard running the Guignolee. I've heard courir de Mardi Gras, which is running Mardi Gras, and that's Louisiana, but I've never really heard running the Guignolee. I only heard going with the Guignolee or doing the Guignolee. So.
I think Reynolds in his book on worldwide history mentions
Who?
Reynolds.
Oh, Reynolds.
Mentions running the Guignolee.
I guess because they travel from place to place, and I'm not really sure why they do say courir de Mardi Gras in Louisiana, other than they go from place to place. and it's called the Mardi Gras Run and the Guignolee Run. So I think that just has to do with the traveling. That's how I've always interpreted it.
Don't Biloxi and Mobile also have Mardi Gras traditions?
Mobile, yes, they do. In fact, I think Mardi Gras is old, that the oldest celebration is from Mobile, but Biloxi, I'm not sure. They might participate in it, but yes, the French settled all the way as far east as Panama City in Florida, and as far west in terms of Texas. You know, you have Beaumont and, you know, part of that area, because that was all included in the Louisiana Territory. So even Vincennes in Indiana, they had a Guignolee at one point in time too. They don't anymore, but I know from, I think, but I'm not sure. I know there's some people that are doing research over in Indiana and that area around Vincennes on the French culture there, and they're seeing little tidbits here and there come up. But the one gentleman who I mentioned in the Franche Postic, he's currently in that area, in the Brittany, Normandy area, mostly Brittany, and he does a lot of work with the folk life there. He has not stopped working on it, but from his research, I still didn't see anything contemporary-wise. But that doesn't mean that it's still not done, because most of these celebrations are done in the rural communities. You don't see them in the big cities. You don't see these kinds of things in a big city. You see a different version of it, and it's not the same tradition. You know, like Mardi Gras in New Orleans is not the same thing as Mardi Gras in Timamu, and New Year's Eve in, you know, like in St. Louis is not the same as New Year's Eve here in St. Genevieve. It's just, it's different. The Mardi Gras, like, you know, you have the floats, the cities have the floats, and then you have people who watch the floats and the parades. It's the same thing with the, you know, the Guignolee. The rural versions are, you know, the more community-oriented, where you travel from place to place, and you visit and socialize with your members of your community versus going to meet the celebration.
In all mine, the melody is different.
It is different. It is a little different. It's got a little bit more of a, like,
Dig to it.
yeah, it does. It's, you know, the versions are different. I have so many different versions at home that, like, I have to sit down and break them all down, because.
From Canada.
Mm-hmm.
That one.
Yep, I do have that one. I have, Bob, you sent me one from Bloomsdale
I think Prairie du Rocher.
and Prairie du Rocher, and I have mine from Prairie du Rocher and St. Genevieve, and I have the Old Mines version somewhere too. I got that one from that's because I got it from the booklet that was put together by Kent Bone and Natalie Vilmer, I believe. They put together a booklet on the Old Mines Guignolee. I was actually up here in the summer looking for the ordinance that outlawed the Guignolee, and he emailed me with the slip of paper, and he's like, do you know what this means with the Guignolee? And I was like, I think that's the paper that I've been looking for like a couple of years. And it's an ordinance describing the forbidding any type of noise making, including and running charivaries, Guignolee. They wrote Guignolee. Yeah, I can't pronounce it the way they wrote it, but the running the Guignolee and one other trick track and anything, I guess, that made noise.
What
So.
was it, about 4 years later, they
Oh, yeah.
running, and they got thrown in jail.
Yes, they did. They got thrown in jail in 1855.
Got them all,
Yeah.
and they went to the tavern afterwards. Yeah.
Well, when Missouri became a state, it was they outlawed any type of gaming or anything on Sundays. And that's when, after church, people went to visit with people, and they had a good time. And so what happened was that sort of eroded at the French and German culture that was in the state when that law was made. And so we had, you know, that sort of kind of started carrying over into other areas, but then they decided to fight back. Germans, I remember I read an excerpt of an article that said that Germans decided to go down the Mississippi in between Illinois and Missouri to play music, even though it was outlawed in Missouri. Like, you're going to hear it anyway. So.
You mentioned the war years of World War I, World War II. I think there was a school children
Right,
DNA,
yeah.
women's DNA, Girl Scout DNA in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Even a couple of African-American DNAs.
Right, that's in some of the articles that you sent me. There was a lot. I didn't have a chance to put all of that in there because it's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get all this stuff in there? And so, yeah, and I think anyone that, like in the other, like in any community, they, to keep the tradition going, it was just whoever they could assemble to keep it going. Like, who's going to run it this year? Who's going to do it?
Well, I think even here now, some of the ladies participate as part of the DNA troop.
Oh, do they now?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good, because I know that when I was here, they're like, we want them to participate. They just haven't.
You pick them up as you go along, you pick up a lady or two.
Well, see, they asked for the eldest daughter. It's even in the song. Come on.
What version do they do here?
The one that I have, this is the one that I transcribed from what I heard here and from the videos that I took of the Guignolee now. This is what I heard. So I hear it's pretty much similar, and I tried to put them on the same page to compare, and it was just impossible with the amount of words. And even this is like tiny words. So you still have the same good evening, master and mistress and everyone in the home. For the last day of the year, you owe us a Guignolee. You owe us a Guignolee. Tell us now, give it to us, or tell it to us. If you have nothing to give us, let us know. If we only ask for the backbone of pork, it's not a great thing. It's only 10 feet long, and we will make a fricassee of 90 feet long. If you have nothing to give us, let us know. We only ask for the eldest daughter. We'll warm her feet, we'll show her a good time. When we're in the middle of the woods, we are in the shade. I hear the dove and the nightingale sing. This is a type of bird, and I can never remember. I have to look at it. The Guignolee du Verbocage. It's a type of love, like a bird that's associated with love. Turtle dove, that's it. Ambassador of lovers, but go tell my mistress that she always has a joyous heart, that she has a joyous heart, no sadness. All the little girls that have no love, how do they live? It's love that awakens her and keeps her from sleeping. Now, in my opinion, this came from a love song somewhere that got stuck in there, that absorbed to try to entice the eldest daughter to come dance. We apologize to the company, to the current company, to please excuse us if we have created some sort of craziness. It was to keep us from being bored. Another time, if you let us come, to have the honor of us coming back. And then it just repeats that last line, which is why I didn't put it at the end, because it's just a repeat.
I wrote it out phonetically, so that some of the other guys could learn it. And actually, a lot of them learned it.
Yes, I have it in here. I think there's a date on there. 1958. It says 1958.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, it's the cuckoo and the dove and the nightingale. So the rossignol, see, I have the English translation in the back, see? The nightingale of the green wooded countryside. Now, in other, there's one or two lines that differ from each of the Guignolées, because right now, Prairie de Richer and St. Genevieve are the only ones that run it every year. The Guignolee in Old Mines will perform for special events or on request, because I don't think they have enough members, or they just don't have enough community members to visit anymore. I'm not too sure about that, but I know that Cahokia used to have one up until about the early 80s, or maybe 90s even. But now most of the members just join the Prairie de Richer group. Do you have people that still come back from far, far away, like moved away from St. Genevieve, that come back and run it just to run the Guignolee?
St. Louis, Kansas City,
Okay. Well, I mean, that's still kind of far. Well, thank you very much for coming to the presentation.